Welcome everybody to the last cafe event of 2024. It's a slightly different event than most of the others we've had this year. So we're not focusing on one topic, one presentation today. It's a slightly more intimate event, a little bit more focused on this year at the FEI, the work we've done, some of the ups and downs, and especially on the work streams that have evolved as the focus of our work throughout this year. So we're really happy to share that with you. And I think what makes this meeting really exciting is that we have a range of presenters that will either present about the work stream, have a dialogue with each other, invite you to participate a little bit. So I think we have a really diverse meeting today, and it should be fun. Before we dive into that meeting, as always, a land acknowledgement. We're all in different places. Because I'm in Toronto, I'll say the land acknowledgement for Toronto. And so we acknowledge the land we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And as always, the invitation to not just have this land acknowledgement present as we're in meetings, but throughout your daily lives as well. Moving into the agenda, just a quick overview. We're doing a quick welcome right now. Randy will then be sharing a little bit about the evolution of the FEI throughout this year, and just frame the conversation and the presentations. We will then move into the different work stream sessions, one after another, all in the big room, no breakout rooms. And you see a lot of abbreviations here: SMI, MARC, LCR, CBS, and EE. For those that don't know all of these yet, trust us, you will hopefully know what they're all about after this session today. We're very, very excited, and a big thank you already to all our presenters that have volunteered to share with us today. You will hear from different people that are very central to these work streams, that know what's going on there, that are experts in their field. And so we're really excited for these sessions. We'll just end off with a few closing remarks, and maybe if we have some time, we'll try to hear from you and how your year was and what you're excited for through the next year. As we start, a quick introduction for those of you that have not been with us before about the Flourishing Enterprise Institute, who we are and what we do. Flourishing, first, it says it in the name. What is Flourishing all about? It is a scientifically grounded vision for sustainability that goes beyond the traditional interpretation of sustainability as sustaining or trying to sustain the status quo, but rather a vision for really realizing the full potential of individuals, communities, and their ecosystems. And so the FEI specifically focuses on enterprises and stewarding a new generation of enterprises that are capable of enhancing the well-being of their communities and wider ecosystems. We're housed at Veris at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo and at OCAD University in Toronto. And we are very grateful for the funding granted to us by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada and the Balsillie School of International Affairs. If you have any questions about the FEI, don't hesitate to reach out. For the moment, this should be it with our quick intro. And so Randy will lead us through our different work streams today. We'll tell you a little bit about how these work streams evolved. And so without further ado, Randy, I will hand over to you.
Thanks so much, Tim, and thanks for the helpful intro. Welcome, everybody. I've been excited to get to this point. I think we've now signaled back initially in September and again through following sessions that we're on a bit of a different pathway, or an evolved pathway as an organization with project-based work streams in mind. And so I just want to talk a little bit about this evolution and sort of what we've experienced as an organization. Perhaps you could describe it as our own maturing, or kind of identifying the sweet spot for the FEI itself as a developing organization. I think you get the general the general terms, what this organization is for, our purpose, what our focus is on topically. The question has remained over the years how we can really best fulfill on our purpose. And for a long while before, we were an institution being incubated at Veris at Wilfrid Laurier University. We were essentially just a relatively casual community of practice, a global network of people who came together once a month and exchanged stories, who shared, we highlighted, the progress and innovations of individuals. That evolved. We saw the opportunity in bringing applied research to some of the work that we're conducting. We've also started the process of thinking about field building, this whole space of systemic management and ideas that help to distinguish and differentiate the unique work that I think those within this community are focused on and what really is the common thread between us. So I think the realization after the last year, we had a pretty important relaunch in the fall of 2023. And over the past year, what slowly and very organically became clear was that the most perhaps meaningful and compelling aspects of what we've been working on are the very things that we've been doing in the field. So we have amassed a pretty healthy community or network of practitioners that are interested. We've had this history of having thought leaders speak about what they're up to as a way of provoking audience conversation, et cetera. But we've got into this more practical focus. And so whether it's been in the municipal sector, working on things like enterprise evolution, which you'll hear about shortly, we started to secure applied research funding and began to really establish a clear and important position as a support to practical innovations that are happening in the field, both in terms of documenting and creating evidence, but also as a catalyst for learning and catalyzing the development and mobilization of new knowledge. And so it just sort of occurred to us that maybe we have this more project-based focus that makes sense for us as an organization. We're not necessarily a big global organization with tons of budget that's focused on, educating and engaging thousands of people globally. But what we are able to do is bring together leading innovators and networks and communities of practice around them based on common interests, and to engage in going out and securing applied research funding and doing research in the field and building new knowledge and sharing that with this community. And so this orientation has started to take shape. And I think if what I'm saying in general maybe doesn't quite land or sound crystal clear, it should sound a heck of a lot more clear as we get into the various work streams that we're going to introduce today and share the practical work that's been happening and the ways that communities have gravitated towards this project focus and begun really unique, interesting, and powerful collaborations. So I'll pause there and pass back to Tim to tee us off.
Thanks so much, Randy. Well, I would say since we're a little bit behind, why don't we just get right into it and start off with our dear colleagues Peter Jones and Stephen Davies, who will start us off with a dialogue and then invite you to participate on systemic management innovations. So Peter and Stephen, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Tim. And good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, if that's the case may be, or wherever you are in the world. Again, my name's Stephen Davies. I'm the principal consultant and managing director of Transformation by Design. I'm an associate professor at OCAD University in the Strategic Foresight and Innovation program. And I've been involved with the Enterprise Evolution program since I think the concept was first innovated or first conceived, I should say, because the word innovation is so twisted and has lost so much of its currency. But let's get started on this topic of systemic management innovations. And so I want to strip off the systemic to start with, and just let you know, the first time I encountered the term management innovation was back in the early 2000s. I think it was 2006, 2007, when Gary Hamel wrote a book called The Future of Management. And in that book, Gary Hamel was essentially claiming that one of the areas where innovation was absolutely essential for 21st century leaders was in the realm of management. And so he coined the term management innovation. At least that's the first time I ever encountered it. And and it really is an interesting phrase because we don't often think about what does innovation mean in the realm of management. And so I'm going to just actually copy his definition directly into the chat window so that everybody has a chance to read along as I describe it. So Gary Hamel says a management innovation is anything that substantially alters the way in which the work of management is carried out. Okay. So you have to have an understanding of what the work of management is in order to really drill into this. So anything that substantially alters the way in which the work of management is carried out or significantly modifies customary organizational forms. So there he's talking about the structures and the roles of management. And by doing so, advances organizational goals. And so, in any purposive organization, typically it's the organizational goals that are the drivers of the enterprise forward. And so, understanding what those goals are and understanding how you're performing in relationship to those goals is pretty critical. And so I just wanted to put this phrase of management information, sort of anchor it where I first encountered it. And it's where it was I introduced the term into the Enterprise Evolution Program. But we were not particularly satisfied with the way it's described. I mean, when we talk about, what is the practice of management, you can talk about setting objectives. You can talk about motivating and aligning effort. You can talk about, coordinating and controlling activities. You can talk about developing and assigning talent. You can talk about, accumulating or applying new knowledge. You can talk about amassing or allocating new resources in the organization. Or you could talk about it as, balancing and meeting competing stakeholder demands. I mean, there's so many aspects of management practice that fall into the realm of management that need to be addressed. And so the question then becomes, how do you know when a management innovation is really important or effective or is going to have significant impact? And so that's where we came up with the notion of, well, what if a management innovation was systemic? And systemic gives a specific connotation to management innovations. And I'm going to toss to Peter now because Peter's going to speak to this qualifier of systemic around management innovation and add some more color to really flesh this out.
Thank you, Stephen. I think I know most of the people, but there's always going to be new people in the cafe. I'm Professor Peter Jones. I'm also at OCAD University at very part-time level now as associate professor, but I'm a distinguished professor of systemic design at Tecnológico de Monterrey, Mexico. So I'm in Mexico City, and this is where I'm maybe spreading the gospel of the Flourishing Enterprise Institute to other regions and locations. I've been involved with the Strong and Sustainable Business Model Group from the very beginning, with kind of the core team of Randy, Anthony, Stephen, and I, and a couple of others were, meeting for a good decade, as Randy had indicated before we started the FEI. And so a lot of the discussions that have led up to the development of the systemic management innovation concept have a real history in our coevolution of the concepts and the applications and a lot of which was originally inspired from the strongly sustainable business model concept, which, and the ontology, the canvases, and the other tools. So as I was also involved with the enterprise evolution pilots and the research, the SHRC supported research, as well as on the EE side, working with Randy and Tim, and with Waterloo and and we're still developing publications around that, and developing what we've learned from some of the pilot work. But at the same time, a number of us are working, I guess, in the work stream on developing the SMI concept. So I want to be sure that we can, we have an idea what some of the good questions might be to explore the systemic approach here. So first of all, what is a systemic management innovation? I think appreciate how Stephen has opened this up for us to discuss, and also want to touch on what lessons we can learn from previous management innovations that have had a systemic effect in the way that we can define those, and how can we apply those types of systemic innovations to the sustainability of sustainability SMIs, which is really a leading area of ours. And so what types of systemic management innovations are really emerging now, that is, are in favor or are going to be increasing in adoption? And another question that we need to ask is how are the SMIs going to be perceived as different and have different value propositions in private sector and public sector organizations? A lot of our early work has been, and partly because of the research sponsorship, has been municipalities and public sector. There could be some real differences in the application of sustainability SMIs, in particular, in private sector. So I want to start by thinking about the systemic approach to this by some of my own history with this. And I think of the history of other, what I consider to be systemic innovations applied to organizational innovation, which in my own work experience range from total quality management, which I was fortunate enough to be involved in early remote trainings with W. Edwards Deming. So in the late 1980s and early 1990s, where Deming was very much involved, or actually, what we'd consider Zoom meetings to, in training of TQM from the master himself. We learned tools in that same period in analytical decision-making, like the Kepner-Trego method, which I consider to be both a systemic method, but then also was used across the organizations. Those were kind of early stages, although TQM became a real movement, and that I think is a good model for us to consider. There's business process reengineering. I was at CSC when they acquired Index and became kind of the first company to lead business process reengineering, which had its own kind of period of adoption and then just went away. Their system development lifecycle management, Peter Senge's fifth discipline, project management offices, knowledge management. And in my own PhD work and working for the last 25 years with dialogic design, structured dialogue, and tools similar to those that you use, Stephen, but with different systems thinkers, so that are literally informed, structured dialogue informed by 50 years of systems theory development and social systems design work. And in recent years, then, strategic foresight, the development of that at OCAD, the systemic design toolkit, which integrates like 30 methodologies in the book, design journeys, but then we have about 50 tools, and the sustainability tools, so that we're deploying in the pilots and learning from their adoption, including the multi-capital scorecard, working with low carbon resilience and other methodologies. And so I'd like to actually, within this window of history, a recent it is not an ancient history, but it is a while ago. At the Business as Agent for World Benefit, the Global Forum for Business at Case Western University, which was about an every 5-year major forum held at Case Western in 2009, which is the second one. I was there, and Peter Senge addressed the 1,000 people or so that were there, where he was criticizing the way in which sustainability was being used. I mean, not that we were misinterpreting sustainability, but just the concept of sustainability, and saying it really was not inspiring. It was basically the way that we were framing it, or maybe not the people in that room, but generally, and certainly in business, was eating your spinach. So it had, I mean, it did not inspire people, and it did not have, there were no practices associated with it that were beyond kind of the maintenance of, the maintenance of, of managing, waste streams and numbers and tracking activities in the organization or whatever. It had no vitality, no motivation within the organization. And so this was, 15 years ago now. And so and he used the analogy that for example, that nobody would be proud of or feel good about a sustainable marriage. And this really hit a lot of us. I mean, we had breakout sessions after this, and as part of a meeting approach that was facilitated by Peter Coughlin of IDEO, and it was and for many of us, it was very inspiring. At my table, in particular, which had people like Boston College's Sandra Waddick, who I've now been a collaborator with, but at the time I just knew her as she was heading up the corporate social responsibility, strategic education at Boston College, and included other people like the lead of the United Nations Global Compact for Business were at this table, and we had never heard this word before, but we invented the word thrivability to characterize what we believed the purpose of sustainability should be. Now, I bring this up because I think this is actually kind of the formation of, so this is 2009. This was before we started. This is when the Strategic Foresight and Innovation Program had happened for a year. It was before I'd seen Anthony Upward's work in the flourishing business model. And so we started with thrivability, but that started to evolve. Several other people developed that as well. That later became flourishing, and there are differences which have actually been argued at, like the ISSS Systems Conference and the RSD conferences and other places. That is essentially, I think, thrivability is within the individual and flourishing is within social contexts, social ecologies and organizations. And so this has led then the concept of flourishing, if we think of that as then the purpose of sustainability, then we've created a context for how another system boundary, that is. So now the organization has to take into account how it flourishes within its environment, within its society, and to include those system boundaries as part of the impacts of the organization's effectiveness. And so those then need to be considered within the tools, not just for pathways to flourishing, but the tools for management that could have systemic impact, not just within the organization as a whole system, but in the organization's commitments.
And I think that's exactly the case, Peter, what you've just mentioned there around bounding the system. Like when you talk about a systemic management innovation, what is the system and what is the extent of the system? Is it just the organization, or is it the organization and its ecosystem? Is it the ecosystem boundary? And so there's significant questions around that that we need to get crisp on. We really do, because conflating the system with the organization, I think, would be a fundamental mistake. And so, especially in this outsourced modern world where, you know, all the big banks no longer have customer call centers. It's all outsourced. But is that part of the organization or not? We need to think about those kinds of things.
If I could jump in quickly, I'm so sorry. If we're going to manage to get through all of our work streams, we're going to have to move on. So I want to offer just a quick remark and maybe invite one contribution in case anyone has a comment or a question they want to add before we head onward. I think from an FEI perspective, the thing to recognize here and what Peter and Stephen have shared is that, we see an importance in defining an explicit term or category that encapsulates a unique and emergent field of innovation that has been very central to our convening and those within our network. And our hope is to develop clarity and develop literature that helps us to bring definition to this field and to bring prominence to it and hopefully an awareness and identifiability to it, because we feel like it is critical to enabling the transition of management within organizations towards more systemic practices. Does anybody want to jump in with a quick question or comment? Okay, great. Feel free if anything else comes up as we go, or you have a thought that arises later, to pop it into the chat, and maybe we can come back to it and give Stephen and Peter an opportunity to reply in case there's anything more. But on this,
yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, we have so much more to develop here. I think Stephen and I would say that we just, in creating the context for a brief dialogue, we have enough to, start writing another position paper or something that could be part of. I mean, we're starting to develop a literature here, so there are papers in the works and definitions and all this. So we could say this work stream is one that's characterized by both a theoretical development, that a lot of which is behind the scenes to be able to write effective research, but then the application of the tools that we are becoming stewards and experts within, and see the FEI and enterprise evolution as structures for the delivery and sustainment of these of selected and best tools that we believe can have this organizational impact across the different boundaries of an organization's system and its effectiveness.
Well said. Yeah, thank you for that, Peter.
Okay.
Cheers. On that note, we'll move on to our second project-based work stream. So our colleague Manuel Riemer from Wilfrid Laurier University, who happens to lead the Vincent Center for Engagement in Research and Sustainability, is going to talk a little bit about municipalities adapting in response to complexity. It is a collaborative partnership that has essentially grown out of the convening and conversations that we lead through the FEI. I won't share any more than that, as I don't want to take anything away from your presentation, Manuel, but feel free to jump in. And I guess just to offer a little bit of a preemptive segue, we have a second project-based work stream that isn't quite completely distinctive of municipalities adapting in response to complexity, called low carbon resilience, sort of almost a subset or work stream, project-based work stream that exists within or adjacent to MARC, which will be talked about by Lauren Vincent next. So we'll start with Manuel and then move on to Lauren. Please, Manuel.
Great. Thanks, Randy, and great to see all of you. So I'm going to, similar to Stephen, I'm going to start a little bit with the origins of this idea. It was a few years back. I was very interested at that time at the interconnection between climate change and equity, and specifically municipal climate action and equity. And I was working on a local project, but then also saw the need to address this across Canada. And so we brought together a group of people interested in this interconnection. And we called that the Towards Equity and Accessibility in Municipal Climate Action. partnership. And in the context of developing this partnership and how to approach this issue, it became clear to us that a lot of the work that was happening at that time on this integration wasn't really very systemic in the way that Peter was just talking about it. And it also was a lot of kind of incremental work that kind of just really touched the surface. And that there was a need to go deeper and really create a transformation at the core of the municipal organization. And in my conversation with Randy at that time and others, um, it became kind of clear that enterprise evolution and this systemic approach that is captured within the systemic management innovation is a really great fit to kind of work with municipalities for that deeper transformative change and really shift mental models towards a systemic orientation. And as we were going into this work, what became clear as well was that this is not limited to just this complex interconnection between climate change and equity in the municipal context, but that municipalities at this point are dealing with a level of complexity due to the poly crisis that really required that kind of change that we were thinking about for the equity part to really apply across the board. There is the issue of departments not working with each other, not seeing issues as interconnected, so creating unintended consequences, not taking up opportunities for co-benefits, and not relating to key stakeholders in the way that is required when you're trying to manage in complexity. And so that's kind of where the idea then for this larger network, municipalities adapting in response to complexity came from. So more and more people kind of saw the same kind of need for a systemic approach with municipalities to deal with a bunch of issues. But it needed to really happen kind of at the core of the organization with the leaders so that they can then manage their organization in a more systemic way and better manage in complexity. And so Mark really became a network of networks where we just a lot of people can kind of connect it, and there were the four major groups that we kind of engaged within Mark. So that was the municipalities themselves, different kind of municipal actors like NGOs that specifically work in the municipal space, like we hear about in a second from ACT. Um, and then academics and social innovators or management innovators, like a lot of you on this call. And so it was really by bringing these different perspectives together that we were feeling we could address this issue of complexity in a municipal context. And so we did a bunch of different work. We developed some papers. For example, one paper that we developed was related to systemic management innovation. We also did some research that Peter was already alluding to in Kitchener, trying to kind of test innovation. So what became clear in the context of Mark is that we want to be kind of a space where people can bring innovation that are relevant to the municipal context. We can test them in the municipal context and further develop them. And one example of that, more recently, is the LCR that we will hear about in a second. And so, yeah, we developed a paper on the systemic management innovation. We developed a report on the Kitchener project, which was an application of the enterprise evolution. And we're working currently on a couple more papers that kind of describe that case. And as you can kind of see from the conversation so far, there is definitely a lot of connection points and overlaps between these different work streams. And I think that's by design because they're supposed to kind of inform each other. And so Mark is maybe like a larger kind of umbrella network that is fostered by the FEI and is related to the FEI. The four core partners in Mark are the FEI, Refocus, ICLEI World Secretariat, and then our research center, Veris, at Laurier. We've gotten a few grants to support some of the work, kind of the connection grant that got it all started, a grant from the Builder City School, a couple of partnership engaged grants from SSHRC. And most recently, we applied for another connection grant to really bring this work of Mark forward and engage in knowledge mobilization related to some of the work that is connected to Mark. Kind of keep that in mind. We will likely reach out to you as we hopefully get that grant and get that work started to really move Mark to a next level. This is kind of the idea of this connection grant is similar to what we did with the FEI, is we want to kind of get into the next stage of development now that we're a little bit more established and we have quite a large following. And I think I'll leave it there. And with that, turn it to Lauren as kind of one of the projects or innovation that is connected to Mark and that we're trying to foster through Mark. So Lauren can talk more about that.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Manuel. So yeah, I'm Lauren Vincent. I'm with the Action on Climate team at Simon Fraser University. And for those who aren't familiar, ACT, as we're informally known, has been around since 2006. We were founded by Deborah Hartford and Nancy Ohlweiler back then. And we basically have two key work fronts at the moment. So the low carbon resilience is one of them, and the other is our natural solutions initiative. And we've been involved in developing low carbon resilience at ACT for over a decade and have been a thought leader in its planning and implementation. And like I mentioned, the Action on Climate team was founded by Deborah Hartford, and she was the one who originally connected ACT to the Mark network through her connection with R3.0 and working with them on sustainable development performance indicators. And like Manuel said, Mark functions as a bit of a network of networks, and that's how we were brought into that sphere. But I'll give a little bit of background on LCR and this particular project and how we became involved with Mark on that front. So for those who aren't familiar, low carbon resilience is an idea that brings together, especially in municipal climate action, but is applicable more broadly. It brings together climate adaptation and climate mitigation. And the idea is really that these topics shouldn't be addressed separately. You don't want to have approaches that reduce emissions while decreasing resilience. So this was sort of the foundation of that approach. And ACT has a long history of working with municipalities to implement the low carbon resilience approach. And in doing that work, ACT realized all of the things that Manuel mentioned already, that municipal organizations tend to work in silos, that systemic approaches are needed to solve these problems. And that was sort of what really, I guess, fast-tracked our relationship with Mark, realizing all of the overlaps in the systemic management innovations and other work that Mark was already doing with municipal organizations. And so ACT was looking to scale our low carbon resilience approach and bring it to a wider range of municipalities. But our team is small, relatively small at SFU, and we didn't have the capacity to facilitate engagements with multiple municipalities. And we also didn't have relationships with municipalities across Canada. At the time, our network was fairly based in BC. And so that was how we got involved in a more directed way as part of our research and innovation stream under Mark, which focused on what we were calling the Low Carbon Resilience Pilot Program. And so Mark's role there was to contribute the international collective of experts and municipalities, which were motivated to test new solutions, and really provided a network that was capable of mobilizing knowledge and scaling the low carbon resilience approaches adoption across Canada and beyond. And so since October 2023, MARC partners have been involved in co-designing this project. And the MARC network has really been engaged in the process to ensure the project aligns with the needs and interests and motivations of the partners, including municipalities and sector NGOs. And so, yeah, this collaborative design process has really led us to apply for a number of different grants, and we're hopeful. We've received some funding for the work we like to do, and we're looking to apply for further grants to support that work. Yeah, so I guess where we're at right now is that we have planning to do a initial workshop session for a group of municipalities. And so if there's any folks who are interested in getting involved in that work or learning more about low carbon resilience or the pilot program as designed, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or me via Randy or Manuel.
Thanks so much, Lauren and Manuel. Hopefully the quick overview is a helpful insight into the inner workings. I think what stands out to me is, the idea of kind of looking at what may be the gaps in or the challenges that are limiting our ability to make change, and how these networks are bringing together a range of actors that together and collectively can begin to accomplish more. And while we're not yet at the full potential of either of MARC or low carbon resilience as a pilot program and work stream, certainly the building blocks are there, given that we have actual municipal actors, the NGOs that disseminate knowledge and do training and resource development in the space, as well as the systemic innovators that are kind of disrupting the status quo, and researchers who we need there to help create new knowledge, make sense of things, accelerate the learning that is necessary to really make change at scale and in various contexts. So let's hope the model continues to bear fruit and gains more momentum. On that note, though, I want to give anyone an opportunity to jump in case you have a question or comment you'd like to make. Would anyone like to jump in? Okay, well, all good. We'll create another opportunity for questions to come back to at the end if we have some time. But I guess for now, we will move on, and our next project-based work stream is focused on context-based sustainability. So I'd like to introduce my colleague Daniela Senkl from the University of Guelph and the Lang School of Business. Daniela will share a little bit on the work stream, and we'll hear from my colleague Mark Brodrick shortly, who's going to share a little more personally. I think part of what we were hoping to evoke through this session and conversation is that as a practitioner, as an academic, as an innovator, or someone with just an interest in learning, these work streams are open. They obviously have their own unique focus, and anyone within the FEI network is free to join any one of the work streams, whether you'd like to keep informed and just follow along, or if you'd like to take a more active role and get involved in some of the experimentation and testing that's happening, or the publishing of literature, et cetera. So Mark will share a little bit of his own personal experience as a professional and now academic, including his tie to the work stream and how his participation has helped to shape or influence his own views and what he's working on independently. So over to you, Daniela. Thanks.
Yeah, hi. Thanks everyone thanks for having me here. I, differently to the others, I was less involved, I guess, in the early stages of this initiative, but also, like, I'm talking about context-based sustainability, so also about context-based sustainability, but also about the cafe. And so I would like to maybe take a little bit of a different approach and share, how I'm coming to context-based sustainability, and hopefully that's, insightful for others as well. So I'm a researcher in the business school, as Randy has mentioned, at the University of Guelph, and there I'm in the Department of Management. Not so much in the strategic management or leadership area that would, I think, also be very helpful in this group, but I'm in accounting, and I'm particularly concerned about social and environmental accounting, and have been for a couple of years or many years, starting from my PhD. And I've through that experience started to take a more critical lens, because in my PhD I was more naive, I'd say, and I've realized that a lot of I'm interested in the reporting and disclosure side of things, that a lot of what has been out there, it was really hard to distinguish the authenticity for me in that stage, and that was a big struggle. And so then there's a lot of literature that I've been drawing from that has identified the lack of a systemic perspective on sustainability, and that a lot of what companies are reporting are indeed incremental, even though I didn't have that language to express that at the time. But I did get that kind of understanding that there is an issue. And so, I kind of got really frustrated around that lack of being able to assess that authenticity. And even though I really immersed myself in that critical literature, there was always that sense of dissatisfaction that even though we have to repeat the word that what's called sustainability isn't actually sustainability, there was this lack of then, okay, so what, where are we taking this from there? How do we then solve that or bridge the gap to, something that is more applied? And that's where I found coming across context-based sustainability really was refreshing to me. And that was, I followed that a little bit in the past, but then I took the UN SDBI training a year ago that builds their work heavily on context-based sustainability. In my own, I would say, exploration, I then also started realizing the importance of leadership. So my kind of approach to that was, even though we cannot, make necessarily sense of the reporting to say which organization is authentic and which is not, you can't throw overboard the whole idea of sustainability, because there are so many really engaged and inner-driven leaders. So there is a really important aspect of looking at the leadership of an organization that's not in isolation from the reporting. And that to me was a really important insight that, there is this interconnectedness. And so, when I say context-based sustainability, I don't know where everyone's understanding is on that. I assume, you've heard or worked on context-based sustainability yourself. There's, basically in short, that method of authentically measuring an entity's performance against science and ethics-based sustainability thresholds. And, I don't need to get into that. I was going to say the initial touch point for me during my PhD was Mark McElroy's work on corporate sustainability management back then in my PhD, but I was really struggling in bringing together, my thesis with, that kind of theoretical knowledge that I've gained from reading that. So there was really always that disconnect. And yes, I get that point, but I don't know how to apply that in my own work. And so coming back to that refreshing position of context-based sustainability, what I realize is that it provides a certain structure, and it provides a need of having certain conversations in an organization that, if we say in the first place, has to be on board or willing to apply sustainability in a meaningful way in the first place. So that's coming back to the leadership, right? But even if you say, we have an organization that is committed, whether that's, public or private organization, it's really hard still for them then to say, are we actually making progress towards authentic sustainability? So there's this whole issue of impression management, but even for those who are committed, it's a struggle, or it's difficult to say, are we making meaningful progress? And so that's where I see, a lot of benefit of context-based sustainability, to say, how are you as an organization internally assessing the performance indicators that are relevant? So even though I approached context-based sustainability, or I came towards it from an interest of external reporting and disclosure, I do recognize the value that that this innovation has for internal or management, performance management perspectives. Maybe on that, notion then to bridge that gap to the practical relevance, you probably have heard from Randy or from maybe others in the cafe in the past, the experiences that he and others have had with the city of Nanaimo and the application of context-based sustainability in their attempt to create authentic sustainability indicators. And this is a wonderful success story, but we also, want to then explore to what extent what extent was context-based sustainability structurally important to get to those successes. So while we can see that the implementation of context-based sustainability led from initial indicators that they had developed from a good intention to something that was more science and ethics based, the learning that we still need to put to paper or put together is, in what ways was it, the context-based sustainability that led to these insights and to these changes. And in order to explore that, we have then applied for a partnership engage grant to work with the city of Nanaimo to unpack and document what had happened to them, but also to make use of that knowledge more broadly. And for that, we're including cities or municipalities in the study that haven't used context-based sustainability, but that have that inner drive of wanting to do well in sustainability because they're sustainable, they use the sustainable development goals or the donut economics model. So if you have any connections, or if you're able to connect this with donut cities or SDG cities, they could participate so we can learn about their current practices and challenges to then, further down the road, connect with the learning that we have gained through the city of Nanaimo to say, where would context-based sustainability actually make a tangible difference? And so in that whole, the project that we're working on is the exploration of that, but it also at the same time requires us to build, maybe important for this group, certain structures. So, at the moment, individuals are working on it or have different views, but the building of the structure to make use of everyone's experience and knowledge is something that we're still building. And so that 1 year grant is helping us with that. And from there, our intention is to apply for a follow-up funding, which would be due in November of the next year. And for that, we haven't really, pinned down the main question, but, lots of the people here are also involved in enterprise evolution. So, we could also think towards how does context-based sustainability work towards the aims of the enterprise evolution, as you have discussed in that work stream one that I unfortunately missed. But how are these tools enablers of something more bigger? So that's a potential. So we are open to hearing your feedback and ideas, and if you want to be involved, reach out to Randy or to myself. And there's also a context-based sustainability community of inquiry and practice that meets once a quarter. And Mark, who is speaking after, has been one of the continuous supporters of that group, and hopefully will share some of the insights and also maybe pushbacks on how to use some more innovative things in a rigid academic setting. So with that, I would like to hand over to Mark. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Hello to everybody, Mark Brodrick here. I worked in municipalities in planning for many, many years, quite a few years in Manitoba, and then quite a few different places in British Columbia. And the last place I worked was up in Iqaluit, up in the Arctic, before coming back to university here at the University of Waterloo, where I'm pursuing a PhD. Very quickly, a couple of comments, and then I want to show you a couple of research proposals that I tried and they failed, and sort of explain to you why they failed. When I was in Manitoba at the time, the Planning Act was undergoing a review. It was the first time in 30 years that they were revisiting the legislation. And at that time, I suggested that the Planning Act should be subservient to a Sustainable Development Act. I presented these ideas to the two directors, but it didn't really go anywhere. One place I worked in BC was Salt Spring Island, and working for Islands Trust, which is a unique organization with also unique legislation. And it came home to me, you know, the limits to things, the carrying capacities. Salt Spring Island is not that big. Population at the time was roughly 11,000, predicted to grow like at least double up to 25,000. There were lots of issues with water availability and water quality. Both the Gulf Islands, Vancouver Island suffers from droughts in the summertime, lots and lots of rain in the winter, but droughts in the summertime. So there were different issues there. So the idea of like carrying capacity or limits to growth, all those things were sort of coming home to me when working on Salt Spring. Another place I worked was Merritt, British Columbia. You may have heard a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, Merritt was subjected to quite significant floods where somewhere between 200 and 300 houses are no longer habitable. Also, out of the time I was there was at least 2 summers where we almost got burnt out by forest fires, and air quality was really abysmal. And then Iqaluit briefly, all kinds of issues, social issues, housing affordability issues and availability issues, and also infrastructure, problems with the permafrost heaving and busting up the infrastructure. I'll leave it there. I can go on, but I'll leave it there. I'm going to share this. Now, can you see this, Randy, or where am I at here? Share.
Looks like it's coming up. Yeah,
Okay,
we can see your spreadsheet.
Spreadsheet.
Mhm.
So again, quite briefly, I think I have a systems mindset. I've worked in agriculture, horticulture, forestry, communities. All these different things to me are systems. So I think I argue that I have like a systems mentality. And in planning, there's many, many different kinds of plans. You're probably familiar with zoning bylaws and official plans, but there's lots of other ones. Park management plans, transportation plans. You can have a whole bookshelf full of all these different plans. But one thing I noticed was nobody ever stopped and reflected back, how well did plan whatever, plan X, do in the time period that we were considering it? And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to do a type of what I'll call program evaluation? How well did something work? The other thing I'll say is I did not hear about the UN Sustainable Development Goals through the planning profession. I was surprised, but I heard about them through just extra reading on my own. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to select a community and do a type of program evaluation? What types of sustainability initiatives exist? What are they doing? How do they equate to the SDGs? So using the SDGs as a type of framework for the program evaluation. And the other thing, in reading the academic literature, there's different ways of looking at the world, but one way is society is made up of the civil sector, the government sector, and the business, corporate or private sector. So I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. Who's who in the zoo and who's doing what in community X? So in living here, I found out that Kitchener was quite committed to the SDGs, and I thought, okay, well, let's have a look at Kitchener. So I started this process, did a series of searches for sustainability initiatives, environmental initiatives, and then you see I've listed them here. And then under column G, I tried to break them down into the 3 sectors, whether they were civil or government or corporate. And then further along, I tried to decipher each, what I'll loosely call organization, from any documents that they had or websites as to what activities they were doing and how would they relate to the SDGs. So that's what all these check marks are. A couple of observations quickly. At the bottom, I guess this is row 31. The areas that came up the most were like good health and well-being, decent work and economic growth, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities. And I thought, well, this is interesting. If you consider social, economic, and environment to be the sort of three factors of sustainability, it seemed like the social and the economic ones were the ones that were most looked at. My own interests are more like the biophysical world and biodiversity. Like, I just think the biophysical world is what supports everything else, the economic and the social. So if you looked at life on land, there was really only one organization that was addressing it. So I'll make one more comment here. Where it fell apart was I was thinking, okay, well, if an organization, for example, is planting trees, or another one is serving meals to homeless people, what is the impact? So if they're planting trees, is that good? How many trees are they planting? Okay, why are they planting them? Is it for reasons of biodiversity? Is it reasons for carbon sequestration? And if you just chose one of those, say carbon sequestration, what was required? What is their impact? What was required? How well are we doing? The idea of the program evaluation was to identify where are we now, we being community X, and how do we move forward was my original sort of thinking. So it fell apart because I couldn't determine the impacts. I may have only just become aware of context-based sustainability at the time, or maybe that came afterwards. So now I'm going to switch here. This was my second research proposal. I won't spend much time on this. I'll assume that most people are familiar with planetary boundaries, and so we're overshooting them. And my research questions at the time, I still had this systems mentality. So I had learned about things called network analysis. And I don't come from a modeling background. I've never done modeling before. I didn't realize there's all kinds of modeling like in academia. But one of them sort of intrigued me. It's called cross-impact balance. Very briefly, where if you have a series of variables, you can try to model the interactions of each individual variable on the other ones. And then you run it through software and it develops scenarios. I referred to them as options because I thought they would be suitable like for decision support. I'll come back to that in a second here. So I was aware of certain variables could be multipliers. They create more impact in the system. And I was also aware, I think, Manuel, you mentioned co-benefits. Another phrase was like synergies and trade-offs. So I wanted to see if I could determine what those were. The thinking was that I assumed a municipal council would play a leadership role in a community. And if they had better tools as to how to make a decision, oh, we want to concentrate on this. Well, here's two ways of going there. And the interactions suggest that if you do this and this, you'll have a better bang for your buck, is how my thinking was. Because all my life, all I ever heard about was do more with less. That's like a mantra, do more with less. So the donut economics is kind of an evolution from the planetary boundaries where you're looking at the social part and the biophysical. So I think I understand that, the idea of thresholds and limitations and so on. I came across the sustainability quotient, which fundamentally at the bottom, what is it you're trying to achieve? How well have you done? If you're talking about the biophysical world, you have to stay below the thresholds. If you're talking about the social and economic, you want to at least achieve the minimum thresholds. Again, the idea of network analysis sort of intrigued me. I could go on, but anyway, here's the guts of this one. So I went to the...
Mark, just a quick mention. If there's any chance you could wrap in the next 60 seconds or so, we do need to get moving.
Sure.
But that would be great. Please feel free to share the next little bit. And just so you know, that I don't think your screen, what you're sharing is following. You may need to stop sharing and share again if you're moving on to a different visual.
Okay. All right, just a second here. My apologies. I can't find the original screen to change things here. Stop share. Okay, and then reshare. How's that?
You're good.
Okay, I'll be fast. So I became aware of the Sustainable Development Performance Indicators, and within that manual, there's 17 threshold indicators. I selected 16 of them that I thought were appropriate for municipalities. So the 16 are all the way down the left column and then all the way along the top. And the idea is you look at each one individually to see how they interact with these different, these other variables or other indicators. I couldn't determine, for example, water use and what the influences or interactions would be between, say, a living wage or the number of women in the workforce or the number of women in management or the number of women who got promotions. So all the zeros indicate that there was no interaction, and so the model won't work. So this one also failed, and I'll stop there and say thank you.
Much appreciated, Mark. It's really refreshing and helpful to just see like that there is this natural intersection between the work that many of us are doing and what's happening in these work streams. And I think the opportunities for collaboration, for looking at research questions together, for potentially doing practical work in the field, for sharing knowledge we gain on various resources, whether helpful or whether they were helpful or unhelpful, is something we can, I think, build more of through the interactions of these various work streams. So thanks for providing us that really useful personal account of your own journey and how some of the work we're doing has influenced and lined up and supported what you're up to and vice versa. Cheers. And with that, I'll pass on to Bernd Herbert, who is our colleague and has been involved very centrally in the leadership of the Enterprise Evolution Development Project and work stream that we've been focused on. There's been a lot of mention of enterprise evolution because it does intersect with pretty much all of the different work streams we've described so far. I'll leave it to Bernd to introduce EE and the work that's been happening around it. Thank you, Bernd.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you, everybody. And thank you for having me at this cafe. Looking forward to give you a glimpse at the project called Enterprise Evolution. And I would like to tell you a bit the story and the journey of my life while I should end up in promoting enterprise evolution and why it makes sense to involve many people in a very engaging development project. You will have seen one or the other slide in the last cafe session that we had as part of the RSD, and I will try bridge from what I heard from the speakers before me. Unfortunately, I wasn't there for the entire session, and I won't bore you too much with this material. However, here, this is what we address as the Enterprise Evolution Program, which basically is all about the mental models and the mindsets and how that poses a barrier to get us closer in whichever concept you mentioned before, closer to fulfilling the donut, the SDGs, flourishing. For us, the purpose is flourishing as our objective. Now, what I would like to do here is basically talk a bit about myself to make the point, how does a practitioner like me, an individual, end up and find it very flourishing to have a value proposition like this program for myself and others. How does that work? But it works a little bit like this. I've grown up in Germany, and I've made my career there. I studied business. I entered into a big corporation and then into a smaller one, which was the smart automobile startup, cold water. I loved that. I was really passionate about it. And I took that knowledge to go into management consulting and basically have a bigger portfolio of places, of organizations where I can learn with them. They hopefully did learn from me. And there was a lot of learning going on in my early career in these colder waters that I was swimming. 15 years into my career, I figured that sustainability was something I really wanted to engage in more. I got more passionate about it, did an MBA on the matter. Friend of mine came along and suggested, why don't you take what you did in your MBA around sustainability with your business acumen? You join us. We are crazy enough to start building a smart city somewhere in the hinterland in Portugal, which is where I'm sitting right now. And that took me like from 2011 to 2020, something like that. And I was really looking forward to merge all these perspectives going forward. I was assigned to run social innovation into a new city from scratch. That sounded very exciting. And the outlook to work with people like Robert Eccles from Harvard or Amy Edmondson, hey, that was just overly exciting. And I brought the entire family to Porto, Portugal, and it cracked on. You can imagine that type of project with a project that was lacking funding from the get-go, had a lot of quality stamps by the government, had all the important people involved. All that was very helpful. But we were building a city like a startup. We were like a crazy bunch of more Silicon Valley-driven, mindseted people, I guess, than anything else. Yes, it was transdisciplinary, but then speaking to what Stephen and Peter might have presented before, it was just Osterwalder's business model canvas that came out. And we found it fancy to use that. Was that systemic? No, not at all. It wasn't. Was our mindset ready to go systems thinking? No, it wasn't. We had all these sciences on board, but everybody was more like dreaming around a multi-sided business model and talking about, hey, we are the new Apple Macintosh for cities. Let's go do this. And all these residents will be employees of all these fancy companies out of the Silicon Valley because they want to come live the smart city vibe down here in Portugal. Didn't work. Pivot. I could say that we were in financial crisis and whatsoever. Yeah, let's leave it like that because we're recording this session. But hey, I also had to pivot personally. I went into teaching. I had to earn some money otherwise. We did grants and all these things before, so that was fine. But I taught at the local university. I, for example, went to the service design college to put my knowledge together around business design and sustainability. And I reached how can I say, like a border there, because look at me, a business person, talking about, let's say, who were my heroes, like the Michael Porters and shared value and social enterprise and these type of things. And I realized at that time, and it was hitting, we were shortly before COVID would hit, and I realized something doesn't match up here. Something in that storytelling of mine isn't good enough. It's good enough to run a first course, but people have started to talk about buzzwords like regeneration, circular economy. And I would build that material in, but I was more than happy that I found the strongly sustainable group. And I learned about the Flourishing business canvas. And that kept me going, and the world all of a sudden opened up and it became more interesting. So I went deeper, I learned more about design thinking, systems thinking. the systemic ways of designing, I would like to call it. I joined volunteering organizations like the Systems Innovation Network. I did a first presentation at the RSD around sustainability, but there was another obstacle there. Talking to companies about sustainability didn't really work. They would want that. Yes, they want their ESG reporting, right? But would they want to go further? No, they do not. Similar to the experience with the smart city. And that to me is basically the analogy around that model I showed you before. This is not the language companies want to hear about. This is not how I enter through the main door. I might enter through the back door, but it wouldn't take me far. And that is when I met Randy and Tim. And I went beyond the Flourishing canvas work with Anthony. And I looked into what we're doing now, the Enterprise Evolution Program. And for myself, I defined the work that I was doing as a practitioner again. Why don't I call this systemic design? Because that is the philosophy that basically Peter inspired me to go after. That was for me the go-to resource. And since I'm that business guy, well, it should be systemic design for strategy, shouldn't it? Because that's another term people are grappling with. And this is all about future fit organizations. So that's like my own personal term. And I've just presented that at the RSD as well. And that is where these things came together, because these strange concepts around systems thinking were very necessary. However, where are the frameworks and tools and practices that give the practitioners within organizations of any shape and form the ability to actually act on what really needs to happen? How can they go flourish? And what does that mean? Like Daniela, for example, said, how does that relate to leadership? What do we do about that, right? It seems to be very intangible. It's in everybody's words, how to go about it. And this is basically where I share the purpose, the vision, the basics of Enterprise Evolution as a program, because this to me is the way to go. If only I knew how to go to the next slide. So I'm introducing the Enterprise Evolution program here again as an overarching framework that goes the way end to end. It's a capability.
The slides aren't moving. So if you meant to.
Yeah, mine is.
Yeah. Over here, it's still the same slide. Yeah. Okay.
Still? It hasn't moved?
It hasn't. You may need to unshare and reshare, because you
Okay,
probably have it on
that.
full screen somewhere on your computer, but what you've done is you've gone into the application, not the full screen version. So maybe that's what's moving ahead. I just wanted to mention as well, Bernd, we have maybe 2 more minutes before we need to begin wrapping the session. So please do what you can.
Can you see something moving on the slides?
No, I think you'll probably have to stop sharing first.
Maybe you can share it instead, and I start talking freely.
Sure, go ahead. I'll see if I can.
Because it's difficult to present the program without the slides. So I'm representing a group of practitioners, academics, researchers, working as one transdisciplinary team. We are very excited to pull together this so-called Enterprise Evolution Program, where we claim we walk end to end, like I just said, coming from an overarching framework that is systemic down to the individual practices. It's a framework that is agnostic, and we're really here to also live and lead by example what a new type of collective can bring to market, to translate this type of theory into praxis for organizations. We are working in different work streams. One is for developing the concept. The next one is to work on the service design and the marketing. And the third one for program sales and how to facilitate these type of concepts into the market. So we're going to share these slides for you, because basically we would like to get your input, your questions, and obviously seek for additional supporters that help us with this project. We are looking for innovation frameworks, and we are looking for people that are motivated to join our various work streams. I leave it like that, and you might have lots of questions.
I think, could you stop sharing from your end, Bernd?
I
Just to go back to
can't because it says I should share. Maybe now I clicked another button.
Okay. In any case, yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. I want to make sure we wrap on time, and of course we can offer to stick around in case anybody has questions. Yeah, I hope that this has provided some helpful insight to those who are with us live or watching the recording into some of the work that's been happening largely behind the scenes over the past year. I think hopefully what becomes clear is if there is a common thread between all of these work streams, there's a recognized need of some kind in terms of what's necessary to begin making progress in the field. You know, whether we're defining a new field or a category of innovation like SMIs, creating an integrating framework like enterprise evolution and a program for delivering it, or building networks of practitioners and various stakeholders who don't typically work together, but whose efforts are needed in collaboration in order to really move things forward, like we have with Mark and the low carbon resilience work stream. I think what's maybe important to note is that these work streams are flexible. You know, this doesn't define the FEI in perpetuity. This is a point in time. These work streams are central and focal right now. They are what's garnering our attention, our focus, and building momentum. Other work streams will develop and emerge. And some of these work streams at some point will perhaps fall off into the background and not be as central in terms of our focus. So I guess overall, our hope is that learning about these work streams gives you some insight into what they're about. If you're interested in staying informed and or contributing and being involved, somehow partnering in one of the work streams, please reach out to us and don't hesitate to let us know. We'll also be circulating a survey after this meeting, which you may have already received, which gives you an opportunity to update your communications preferences, as we're going to be transitioning to fewer general communications over the year and more workstream-based communications in combination with a less frequent general communication to keep our community in touch with what's going on. On that note, I'll pass off to Tim to wrap the session. Thank you so much, Bernd. Sorry for not mentioning that sooner.
Thanks, Randy. Yeah, we're already pretty much over time, so I think not much left but to say thank you again to all our presenters. And to the attendees, we hope that, I mean, it was a little bit more information, I guess, today, but we hope that you enjoyed seeing all the different great minds, the amazing colleagues that are in the network of the FEI and the different angles from which we approach the topic of flourishing. So we hope this tour de force through our programming was exciting for you as well and provided some interesting insights and perhaps sparked some thoughts of how you could get in touch with us, enter our different work streams, start collaborating. So we hope that this was a good last session of the year for you. We want to say thank you for a great year. We actually wanted to hear from you a little bit at the end, but we promise we'll put that in for our first session of next year, and we can just start off the new year like that. So for now, let's just say we hope you have a great rest of the year, and yeah, we're looking forward to hopefully seeing all of you again in 2025. Thanks so much for joining us, and all the best.